Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Brianna Randall, and I work in the UW Seattle Career and Internship Center. Thank you for joining us for this afternoon's panel. I'm going to start with a couple of announcements, and I'm going to put a couple of links in the chat function. So I encourage you to open the chat box if you're able and click on some links that you can access later. And then I'm going to turn the panel over to my colleague, Heather. One thing I wanted to let you know is that we have a virtual career and internship fair tomorrow, and there are still slots available. And how a virtual fair works is that you can meet individually or in small groups with specific recruiters from specific companies virtually. So I think it's less intimidating than going to an in-person fair. So that could be a really great way to connect with recruiters, and all or most of the 20 plus employers who are attending still have slots available to sign up for. So I would highly encourage you to register for the fair, which is the first step. And the second step is signing up for specific slots with specific companies to attend that fair tomorrow. Okay, so that's the first link. And the second link I wanted to share with you is some additional resources specific to the job search. I keep accidentally closing my chat. On our website, we have some resources about career development specific to students with disabilities. And so I've put that link in the chat as well. And I will try to put those links in the chat at the end as well to capture people who might join us after this, because those won't be present anymore. All right, that is my spiel. I am going to go off camera and I'm going to turn it over to Heather, who will get us started.
Great. Thank you, Brianna. Welcome, everyone. I want to start out by thanking you all for being here today. And we're going to begin with just a few access notes, and then we'll dive right into introductions. So, access notes first. Michelle, our fabulous captioner, is joining us. So if you would like to use captioning, you can go to your Zoom toolbar, likely at the bottom of your screen, and select the button that looks like a square with the letters CC to show captions. Or if you prefer, you can access the streaming captions using a link that I am going to put into the chat. And what that does is that creates streaming captions in a separate window or separate browser from the Zoom browser. For those of you using ASL interpreters, Courtney and Elizabeth are our interpreters today. So if you would like to pin the interpreters to your Zoom screen, just let us know. You can send us a note via chat to the hosts. We'll make sure that you have that capability. And if at any time you're struggling with access during this panel, just send us a chat and let us know and you can select the hosts and panelists and we'll endeavor to assist you. Perfect. So again, thank you all for joining our panel today. Disabled alums share strategies for career success. This panel is hosted by the Career and Internship Center in collaboration with the Disability Resources for Students Office and the Disability Studies Program. My name is Heather. I am faculty and the director of the Disability Studies Program here at UW, and I myself identify as multiply disabled and have lots of opinions and thoughts about access in the workplace. I am really honored to welcome this incredible group of panelists who have agreed to share with you their job-seeking wisdom and it's going to be already a long panel. Success stories with us today. We're so glad to have them here. Uh, we've prepared a set of questions for our panelists, but we also really want to hear and incorporate your questions and concerns. So please put your questions into chat, send them to us, and I will work to weave those questions in and ask our panelists to address them. So I'm going to start us off by I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves. And panelists, I'm hoping that you'll share with us your name, information about your internship or job that you're currently holding, and briefly describe your disability, your health condition, body-mind difference that you have so that audience members have some context for ways in which you navigate employment. So again, thank you all for being here, and I'm going to start us off with Olivia. If you could please introduce yourself.
Of course. Thanks, Heather. Alrighty. Hi, everybody. My name is Olivia Aka. I use she and they pronouns. Either are fine. But I'm coming to you today as an access coordinator at the Disability Resources Office here on the Seattle campus as well. So part and part as the panelist, but also like here as just a genuine person sharing my experience with my disabilities. I have multiple. As we can see, I have a physical disability. I have achondroplasia dwarfism. It's one of the most common types. It just affects my stature, makes my arms and legs a little bit shorter than a typical or average person. I also have a couple of chronic health things that actually did not occur when I did the last panel. So now I have some new insight about changing accommodations and coming back and saying, hey, I need more. So I'm excited to dive into that and talk a little bit to you guys about that as well. But that involves primarily like pancreas and just internal chronic health kind of concerns. But that's a little bit about me.
Great. Thank you, Olivia. Kelsey, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Kelsey Kaczynski. I am a marketing manager of creative and brand experience at Murray Franklin, which is a luxury home builder in Bellevue. I identify as neurodiverse and I have multiple health conditions that make me considered disabled. I have ADHD and bipolar disorder 2 as my neurodiversity. And then I have celiac disease, which makes me allergic to gluten. And newly, as Olivia said, something discovered since last year doing the panel, I have narcolepsy as well. So navigating that is a new one. Um, but yeah, I'm really excited to be here. And thanks everybody for supporting this community.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelsey. Hannah, will you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. My name's Hannah Noble. My pronouns are she, they. Again, like Olivia said, either one works. Information about my job. I am a case manager for veterans who are struggling to find housing and navigate their housing stability. And then I have a lot going on, but I think the ones that affected me most during like school and current are like ADHD. And then I've got like uh chronic pain, which, makes things difficult. But that's just a little bit about what I've got.
Great. Thank you so much. Um, And one of the things that I love about this panel already is keeping it real. This sounds exactly like a group of my disabled colleagues as we talk about discovering new things or weaving in and out of different accommodation needs. So much, much appreciated. I want to start us out then thinking about disclosure. Um, all of you had just mentioned some things that may be obvious and some things that probably are not to those that you work with. And so I'm wondering, I want you to think a little bit about, have you disclosed to your employer that you have this condition or impairment that you talked about? And maybe some reasoning about why you decided to disclose or maybe why you didn't disclose some things. And if I could kind of work backwards, Hannah, do you mind starting us off to talk about disclosure?
Absolutely. Um, First thing about disclosure is when like I was applying to my current job, there's always the question where it's like asks you if you're disabled in any way. And they say that they don't report it, of course. And that it just goes like whatever to like federal or state reporting, so that they can get what's the word I'm looking for? It's the brain fog. See, it's a problem. Um, so they can get funding. That's the word I was looking for. Anyway, so I did disclose my disabilities, and I don't think it affected getting my job in any way. Um, but as far as like going forward after I got my job, um, I have like lightly mentioned it to my coworkers and supervisors, but I have not, because I don't have any like physical differences. Um, it's I feel like hard for them to accept a a disability that they can't see. Because a lot of my coworkers are come from like an older generation and I think really struggle to like understand this like the new way we're defining disabilities, and that's more inclusive and accessible, and I think that's all I wanted to say. But yeah, I've noticed when I talk about my clients who are disabled, I get a little pushback on if they actually qualify as disabled, and I think that's very strange, and it honestly makes me like think twice about really disclosing formally like my disabilities to any like supervisors or managers in any way. Okay, I've rambled enough.
No, thank you, Hannah. Thank you.
I can jump in here.
Kelsey, great.
Yeah, so as far as my disabilities, I think ADHD is one that kind of almost comes up like in a joke. Like if you're having brain fog or something like Hannah was talking about, or you're having a hard time organizing something, or you're running late, it's easy with a coworker to kind of just bring it up like, oh, sorry, that was my ADHD kind of thing. So I think in the context of that, I've disclosed with teammates, um, but it always felt very lighthearted. But then when it comes to more of my bipolar disorder, I have never disclosed that at a workplace, just because of stigmas that are around it. Um, because I am a very level headed person, somebody who goes to therapy very often, and somebody who has really like ever since I found out about my bipolar disorder, like really like took the bull by the horns and like decided I want my future to look different than what the stereotype looks like. And so I never felt like I let it affect me in the workplace to where it would be noticeable. So it never felt like something I needed to disclose. Um, but I have this year had to disclose my narcolepsy because I needed to request work from home accommodations on occasion when I'm having a hard time waking up and I feel myself falling back asleep and don't feel comfortable getting behind the wheel of a car and stuff like that. And so that has been a new thing to kind of navigate, is getting the doctor's note, filing the official paperwork, what that looks like. And I will say, before my current role, I worked at a company that was less than 50 people. And that did get a little bit difficult because they don't have as much of a official HR department as a company of a larger size. And so, yeah, I guess that's what I want to say on disclosure.
Thanks, Kelsey. Olivia, do you have things you'd like to add?
Always, but I think there's a couple things at least that I want to highlight here. For me, I have a physical disability that's not something that I can't disclose. Like you see me, you know that I have a disability. It's not something that I can choose whether or not to disclose. at certain moments. So for me, I've disclosed, the minute I walk into the door in the interview. Like I don't have that choice, unfortunately, which, can be a blessing and a curse sometimes, depending on the office and the individuals that you're working with. I've been fortunate enough to work at an office that's centered around disability. So it's been very easy for me to say, hey, I need a stool here, or hey, I might need this one thing here. And that's been something that we've been able to do. But it's been easy for me to disclose because a lot of my needs are also pretty simple. It's usually just a stool here or there, or a support chair, things like that. And so disclosure for me hasn't been too difficult in that realm. Now, when I speak about my chronic health, which is still kind of undergoing diagnosis and doesn't really have like a full, I don't even have a word for what it is, or like things like that. And so for me, it's hard for me to be able to disclose that with others when I don't even know what's really going on with myself. So I found it challenging. I find that it's a lot of just saying like, hey, I've got some stuff going on with my health. I'm trying to figure it out, and just kind of like sharing what I feel is needed in that moment. But I don't really tend to share beyond that unless it's someone I'm super comfortable with, or it's something that like I feel like I need to disclose. Like for my supervisor, I've had, similar to Kelsey, had to do some work from home days occasionally due to the nature of my health condition. And with that, I've been able to work with my supervisor and let him know. And we've worked out an agreement where I can, if needed, occasionally take a day. So for me, it's really kind of depending on what diagnosis I'm talking about and where exactly I might need the support. But I find that, in terms of the indivisible, I am actually a lot more quiet about that than I have been about my physical. And so that's definitely been a change in mindset for me in terms of navigating the two.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank all three of you for these points, and I think you're all raising really critical points about um, both the visibility, what kind of assumptions people might make when meeting you, as well as the context of where you're working and whom you're working with, and what kind of signals you're getting. I think Hannah's point about, working with disabled veterans and hearing colleagues, maybe the way that they talk about or think about that category is certainly going to shape and signal um, what kinds of stigma or stereotypes, Hannah, that you might face on the job market. So, and I also, I want to I should have maybe opened with this, but I wanted to get some just raw right off the cuff answers, and boy, did you all deliver. But when we talk about disability disclosure, it is such a deeply personal and contextual decision. And that for everybody who discloses on the job, there's almost never a one-time disclose and done because there may be new people that we meet on the job, or as is the reality here for myself and our panelists, our needs change. And so we have to continue to have those conversations. Thank you all for being so open about this process. This is in itself a little bit radical. I have to remind myself that's a little bit radical for disabled people to be talking about their access needs out loud. Um, and so now that you've talked a little bit about the decision, what kind of cues you took from your workplace, what about some reflections? So, um, Kelsey's talked a little bit about being lighthearted and talking about ADHD or introducing this. So I'm going to prompt all of you to think a little bit about advice that you might give to somebody about disclosing a type of disability or impairment that you have based on your experiences. And so now moving out of the what you have done to like, would you do anything differently, or would you recommend anything different? Kelsey, can we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I was about to raise my hand. I would say, as far as like workplace disclosure, my advice, I've never disclosed in an interview. I have in an application, the way that Hannah was talking about, by checking the boxes, right? But I've never done it in an interview, and I would recommend not to, because I think that people are more than their disability. They have skills, they have all these things, and not even allowing that to like come to the forefront and try to skew anyone's decision, I think is smart. And then as far as the workplace, I would recommend, unless it's like affecting your work or potentially it's a visible difference that you can't really not disclose, I don't necessarily think you need to wear your heart on your sleeve in that way and share it. If it affects your work and your ability to do the job that they're giving you or the expectations that they have for a project, I would say it's very important to advocate for yourself, because otherwise you could be seen as somebody who can't get the job done, and that you definitely could if provided certain circumstances, right? So that would be my advice.
Great. Hannah or Olivia, invite either one of you if you have thoughts on this.
I can hop in next. I would say in terms of disclosure and kind of what I would or wouldn't do. Again, yeah, with my physical, I don't really get that choice. I think for me, when I went into these interviews and when I went into these moments, it's kind of just like does it relate to the job function? What do I need to tell you in relation to it, like my ability to get the task done? Because similar to Kelsey, if it doesn't impact your ability to get the work done, you know, why share all these intimate details about your life before you even know if you have this job, And so for me, I would kind of, say like, if it does relate to your job, yes, share that. But I think also in terms of like actually being in the workforce, if you're, experiencing these impacts and you want to share, that is something that I encourage, because like Heather said, yeah, this is radical. Us talking about this is radical. And frankly, we need a little more radicalism sometimes. It's becoming a state where I think that talking about it is the only way we're going to encourage conversations about it in the future. And so I think if you're comfortable enough to be in that position, to be the person to talk about it, then do so. But also know that then people might look to you to be that person to talk about it. So know that that's going to be something that is going to come back to you. So for me, like with my chronic health, I do kind of wish I kept a couple things a little closer to my chest, just because then people kind of expect that same level of disclosure later on. And it's not that I mind it, but I don't love having to repeat it constantly. And so sometimes it can get a little grating, especially if I'm also dealing with the health impacts of that and I'm not in the best mood. So, it kind of depends again on the state and the way your work looks. But I think for me, it's a matter of like, if you feel that confidence and you know what you need and you can advocate for yourself, talk about it, be willing to disclose the things that you need, but also, be mindful, you don't have to bury yourself like that. For I'm going to go off topic a little bit, but like for some of the students I work with, when talking to instructors and things like that, you can share that you have flares. You can share you have these impacts. You don't have to share what those look like, but you can share the impact they have to your academics or the work that you do. And so for me, it's kind of being able to relate that, but still kind of maybe keeping details that you don't necessarily want or have to share, a little bit more private if you feel comfortable. And again, that's all individual comfort level. Sorry, that was a little all over the place.
Absolutely. Um, so I think next what I want to ask about is the interview process, because you've all touched a little bit on like, here's what I did during the interview, or here's what I didn't do during the interview. So I would just say job interviews are really intimidating for everyone. Doesn't matter where you are in your work journey, always intimidating to go through a job interview. So um, I'm wondering, when you applied for this job, or if there's a job interview scenario that stands out for you, um, tell us what were you most concerned about? How did you prepare? And have you gone through an interview process where something happened for which you were not at all prepared? Also really good tips. Hannah, can we start with you?
Yeah. In my interview with the job I have currently, it was over Zoom, which made things very comfortable. Well, I shouldn't say very comfortable, but more comfortable than not. Um, and I think that was really helpful because I could have captions on. Um, and it felt very low stakes because everyone else was at like in their home office or in their bedroom. Um, and I know that's not going to be an option for everyone. Or like, yeah. I did not prepare in any way. And that's just a testament to my like ADHD and chronic pain, because I don't have the time. Yeah, I don't feel good. And it's not something like I want to be spending my time doing, preparing for a job interview. And that is not good advice. So don't take that from me. Um, I think I was relatively unprepared for people in the job interview having the same name. There were, I had spoken with a manager who had the same name as one of my future coworkers. And I thought I was talking to my manager when I was talking to my future coworker. And that got a little messy. Um, so maybe just ask for some clarification beforehand. Um, and I think, and I'm not really sure if that really relates to my disability in any way other than like the brain fog and the confusion and the ADHD and all those fun things. Um, but that's my advice. Double check who you're talking to.
Thank you, Hannah. That's actually great advice. I mean, because we're here to talk about just jobs in general, no matter who you are. And as you were saying that, I noticed I have sticky notes around me for every conversation where I write everybody's name down because it's hard for me to keep track of those things. That's a great example, a great example. And to always feel comfortable just to be upfront and clarify. Are you the same person that I talked to on the phone, or is this the same role? That is such a classic example. Kelsey, Olivia, do either of you have something that stands out for you about the whole interview process that you'd like to share?
I have one from an internship that I did pre-COVID, so a while back, I know. But in terms of my undergraduate, I did a couple of internships with like local nonprofits up in the area of the undergraduate college that I went to. And I ended up going for this like little desk role, event coordinator position because I was like, I can do this. Like this seems like something I know my capabilities are within, and I love talking to people, so this is great. I applied, I got the interview. They said, come down to the office. So I brought my little stool, got myself ready, put a little collared shirt on, walked myself down to that office, and I came in, threw down my stool and said, hi, I'm here for the interview, and popped myself right up to their desk. And they were, I think, a little bit taken aback at first by just kind of my boldness and just my ability to say, like, hey, yeah, these are the things I need, and I have these right away. And so I think for me, I approach it very much like, this is who I am. So you're either going to see this individual as who we are and who I am, or you're going to have, your prejudgment on that, and I'm going to have to prove you wrong anyway. So we'll just see how this ends up going. But luckily, I got into that interview and they had like two questions about it, and then otherwise it was just about the role and what I could do. And so for me, I think I found that like it's also about your confidence when you're approaching it too, in terms of like the interview and the disclosure. Yes, they're nerve wracking. I was nervous as heck. I was shaking the entire time I walked up there with my little stool, but I was going to do it because I knew if I didn't present myself that way, then I would have been presented in a different way that I didn't want. So for me, it was more about how I'm presenting myself and who I am. I know what I can do. I know my capability, and it's my job to kind of sell that. So I'm not talking about the disability, impacts. Yes, if there are something that I need to discuss, I will discuss that. But first, I'm going to address who I am and what I can do for this role. So I think for me, I focused on the why I was there, and then I kind of added on, hey, yeah, there's going to be some couple things that I might need in terms of like moving a shelf down or grabbing something for me occasionally. But I will say, yeah, it's about the confidence, because they were, I think, maybe a little too shocked to ask a couple more questions than they wanted to. So that's at least been one of my experiences. And that was also, I think, when I was a little bit younger and naive to like the stigma, because I'd grown up in such a small town that everybody knew me. So I didn't really think about that kind of thing. And so for me, I like didn't think about it at all. And then I came in and I said, oh, I should have probably made that a little bit differently. But okay, well, this is who I am. So that's, I guess, my kind of insight on it.
Yeah, piggybacking off of that, my advice was going to be just be yourself, and even if it takes interview after interview after interview, don't settle if you feel like you're not sure where you stand with anybody. Because like I'm a little bit later in my career at this point. I have 10 years experience in marketing, and I've done interview after interview, and to get my more recent job, I was like, oh, I hope this job gives me an offer and blah, blah, blah. But then I couldn't really say like what I was excited about for the role. And like, I was like, well, I don't really know if they liked me. I'm not really sure, but I kind of want this offer. And then I had my interview with my current company, and they loved me from the second they met me. And they were like fighting to get me to work there. And there ended up being like negotiating and everything like that. And they were messaging me like, I can't wait for you to start, blah, blah, blah. I knew exactly where I stood when I left that third interview. And I know that's very rare, and some people don't get that experience just because managers might not be as expressive as the one that ended up hiring me. But knowing where you stand with people really will make you feel comfortable going into any new role, whether you have a disability or not. And then having that trust from the very beginning that, like, they could see who you were without even really knowing you that well, and from just the interviews, that's going to make you feel more comfortable going into something and knowing, they seem like somebody that I would disclose to, you know.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's such a great, these three different experiences, I think is a really great illustration of working within your comfort zone and your bounds. To Hannah's point of, particularly if I'm having a flare or something, there will be some things that's like, no, there's no preparation happening. I'm just gonna roll right into the situation. That's where we're at. Um, and so to balance that out with, again, really like in hindsight thinking about, so I'm going to make sure and ask all the questions because I'm not going to be able to do the homework beforehand. I think that's a great takeaway. I think that this message comes across really clearly about be yourself, even if yourself might be a little over assertive maybe for the first time. But I do think that it really does resonate, the idea of the more you are yourself, the better, the more likely you are to find a good fit between you and the employer. I love these real examples. So now I want to ask a little bit about accommodations on the job. And so first, I'll just start with if you have requested any accommodations for your work. And again, keeping it real, I think many of us know that there are formal accommodations that we request, and then there's probably a lot of informal accommodations that we might negotiate or request of colleagues or supervisors, or that we just kind of do on our own. So, prompting you all to think about the accommodations that you use to be effective at your job. Let's start there, and then we can talk about the process of formal versus informal or those kind of navigations. I'm going to come back. Olivia, can we start with you because you've already talked a little bit about some of the accommodations for your work.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, I've gone through both processes of formal and informal. I will say the things that I find that I needed most for to be able to do my job was physical accommodations in the office space. So that stool, that cushion, and that, was just, we kind of figured that out as we went. I sent over brands we recommended, we kind of worked through that together. And then I also, for me, I've found success with, like, yeah, the occasional flexibility if I'm really not doing well health wise with my chronic health. And that was, yeah, part of that formal process and things like that. And for me, um, those kind of have been my main three. It's just like occasional flexibility as needed, and then the physical accommodation for me. So it's been pretty simple in terms of my requests. I haven't had anything too complex that I've had to navigate, other than the change occurring mid work. So that was the only kind of, but I'll let us maybe go to that later.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Um, Kelsey.
Yeah. I would say as far as formal accommodations, I found that we had an informal process. And then once we figured out what was working for me, that's when I had gone back to my doctor and said, these are the things that are helping as I'm figuring out what this is, what referencing my narcolepsy. And then it was okay, can we write this up now so then I can give it to my company so then we can keep the accommodations going and I can stop feeling like I'm asking for a favor, is kind of what it came down to for me. Because my boss was being accommodating and he was asking how I was doing, and he was very invested in like how my appointments went, which is kind of where Olivia had touched on, like sometimes you're open with people and then they expect that openness further down the line, which can be uncomfortable. Which I would tell him how one appointment went, and then later down the line, it would be, so how did that appointment go? Because they genuinely cared, but you have to be careful. Like they could use some of that information against you later, and stuff like that, and be like, well, I thought that appointment went well when you ask for something. So for me, it was asking for delayed start time on occasion, but then I would stay later to make up for the time, depending on how I was feeling when I woke up, or work from home, or and then for my ADHD, I had paid for on my own a Speechify account so that I could have documents read to me out loud through my headphones to eliminate time having to read things on occasion if it was a bigger document. But yeah, that's kind of how my process went. And then as far as for my celiac disease, anytime we had like a company potluck or something, I would ask everyone to disclose what was in their foods and remind them about everybody's allergies in the office before we then served food. So,
Great. Thank you. Very concrete. Appreciate that. Um, Hannah, do you have informal or formal accommodations at your work?
Yeah, definitely a little bit of both. For formal accommodations, I got into a bad accident in May while I was on the job. And was like, they were required to accommodate me, per like L&I, but also, just general ADA laws. Um, and I was given this like, dictation tool, but it was attached to my laptop. And I unfortunately work in a very open office. There's no like private room you can go into and use. And so it was almost like it didn't work in any way. Like it
Mm-hmm.
was helpful when I was at home. Um, but when I was in the office, which is, Tuesday through Thursday, there was no way for me to like really type or get work done. Um, which like all day has been on my laptop. So that was very difficult. And I ended up taking about 2 months off because they just like couldn't really accommodate me in the way that I needed, um, unless I was at home. And a lot of my work is in the community. Um, so it was just, I was like stuck between a rock and a hard place of like needing a formal accommodation, it being provided, and it just not working, and just having to take time off. Thankfully, Ellen and I covered everything, um, but I can't imagine what that would have been like if I were to have had that accident, um, off work time. Um, and I don't even want to imagine it. As far as like informal accommodations, I have brought in my own chair, which I ended up didn't not liking, but it was only $15 from a thrift store, so I'm not too hurt about it. Um, but I do struggle with like the chairs in the workplace, and I've just gone around and switched my chair out with other coworkers. They don't know what it's fine. Um, and that has been pretty helpful just to like try to find the right chair that'll work for me because we have so many different chairs in the office. I'll just snatch one up and see if that works for me. But yeah, I can't remember any other informal accommodations because of the brain fog. And I had one that I was thinking of, but it's gone. And if I remember it, I'll come back, but it's gone for now.
Absolutely, we'll come back to that. And I just want to clarify, so with labor and industries, because of the accident at work and you took time off, so was that like medical leave time off that you took?
Yeah, so it was kind of FMLA, but it was through LNI. So it was really, really complicated because LNI was paying for it. Um, so instead of it being
Mm.
FMLA, it was LNI leave.
Hmm.
Uh, it's a very complicated process, and I can't even pretend to tell you that I know what it's about. Um, but in the beginning, I did have to take all of the sick leave and holiday leave and vacation leave that I had before LNI kicked in because it was about 2 weeks. And then they did eventually give it all back once I went back to work, which was very helpful. And of course, they are required by LNI to do that, um, which was again, very helpful. Uh, but I think, if it was an outside of work accident, then FMLA would have been very helpful. Um, but again, like kind of concerned about the amount you're paid when you're out on leave. And like sometimes you have to use the leave that you've accrued just to get a good paycheck. Um, yeah, it's
Yeah.
a very frustrating world to try to navigate FMLA and LNI for disabilities because there's just like you're not going to get paid for full time, um, even if that's what you might need. Um, Especially like with the economy these days, very difficult to take on like 60% or 80% of your regular paycheck. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that, what you're talking about, you're also raising a really good point, is that it's very confusing because there are a number of laws that outline and support accommodations for folks. Certainly the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Family Medical Leave Act, and so none of us are expected to be experts at all of this. So know that there are a number of resources that you can reach out to look for this information. And we'll make sure and follow up to everybody who's joining us for the panel. We're happy to send out some information that people can pin or use as resources. Which brings me to a question that came from our audience, which is about, first of all, they also say, thank you all so much for sharing how real navigating employment is. So, yes, thank you for keeping it real. And then, are there resources to find known employers who are accommodating when you have a disability? And in this person's case, especially a flare or an exacerbation for those of us who experience fluctuations in our capacities. And I want to address this a little bit first by saying that one of the things that I think is really important if you have, particularly if you have very complicated or potentially ever changing accommodation needs, is how important it is to look for these signals that an employer is going to be disability friendly. I wish that we had a secret list of employers. I really, really do. And part of that secret kind of information is knowing other disabled people and talking to folks about their experiences and different types of employers. But before I start to talk about ways to look for signals, I'm wondering if any of our panelists have any thoughts or ideas about recognizing ways that you might have learned to recognize or suspect that one type of employer might be a little more disability friendly than another. I see Kelsey's already got their hand up, so jump right in.
Yes. Um, I would say the first tip that I have is finding a company that at least has 50 employees. Because I have found in smaller businesses, owners tend to decide your fate a bit more, opposed to having a formal HR department. So I would suggest anybody with a disability that affects their work, or if they want to avoid having to disclose to coworkers and just be able to disclose to the people who need to know the information, which is HR, I would propose you look for jobs with a formal HR department. I also would recommend looking on Glassdoor. There's not anything specifically on there about disability accommodations, but I think the way that employees talk about a workplace can help you find red flags about how they treat people in general. And if they treat people well, and they don't have a high turnover and all of those things, you can assume that if whatever percentage of people run into a hardship at work, if they're still there 5 years later, the odds of them having needed to ask for something, whether it's an accommodation, a leave, to take care of their family, something like that, the odds are likely that they ran into something in life, because life hits us all, even if we're not disabled, right? So I would say formal HR department, and then how people talk about how they're treated.
Thank you. Yeah, great points. Hannah, I see you want to jump in.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My computer's glitching a little bit, but I did want to mention the red flag that I see the most is any sort of like weight restriction, like a lifting restriction. Like you have to be able to lift 50 pounds or you have to be able to lift 100 pounds. I see that as a massive red flag. Because shouldn't there be someone to accommodate that if you can't lift it? I don't know. Just seems a little odd, and I avoid them like the plague. I really do. Um, also, Veterans Affairs is very friendly to folks who have disabilities, and I always recommend them as someplace you should seek a job from. Um, they're so accommodating to our veterans specifically, but also like any disabled person.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. Olivia, did you want to jump in?
Not too much to add. I think everyone's covered really well. I think one thing that I would add is like, do they have a published disability process similar to like Kelsey? Do they have, yeah, an HR? Do they have something already published? And this is going to go kind of into, it's a little bit of a legal jargon talk, but when you look at the ADA, there's public versus private entities. So if you're looking at a public entity, typically they're serving the public. They have to have these published process. They have to. So a lot of the times work through public entities or government entities tend to already have a process outlined and really clearly stated. So like for me, I work at a school that already has that process outlined, that already follows, this law. And then obviously they for private entities, it can change in the way that they honor the ADA and like the way that it goes into place. And it's, yeah, a lot smaller. And sometimes that can involve more discussion, more disclosure, things like that. So I think kind of getting an idea of the mission and the individual, and then also like seeing what published process they have. And then also like for me, just looking into terms of like diversity, what does that look like for that place? How accepting are they just in general? So like, what does that look like? And I think obviously living here in the Pacific Northwest, we have, a greater idea of like what offices look more like that versus not. And so I think for us, it's a lot of just kind of looking through the company as a whole. I think looking into their mission statements, things like that, like looking into really what they value as a company can tell you a lot about who runs it, how they might run it, and things like that. So like kind of for me, like how I went through my nonprofits when I was in my internship, I looked at their mission values, I looked at what they did, and that told me a lot about the people that ran it. And then I also just emailed them random questions about the mission as a whole, and their interaction just based off of that random person email told me a lot as well. And so sometimes it's okay to do a little preliminary digging as well.
Absolutely. I love that tip of almost anonymously checking in, see what's going on. Kelsey, please.
Yeah, I thought of one more thing. Just kind of, I'm never somebody who obviously likes to think about stereotyping either. But I think to myself, there's certain industries of work that you may assume have less accommodating factors as well. And so I would keep that in mind too, where some like business, there's a lot of ambiguity, like it depends on the business. But if you are working in an industry, it's almost similar like if you're a female facing person and you're getting a job that's in a male dominated industry, you can assume that there's going to be a little bit of stuff you got to work through to stay liking that industry and being a part of it. I think it could be similar to having a disability. There are certain industries that like I might avoid.
Yeah, and so to recap, again, I really appreciate this, but to recap, looking for larger employers that have an HR department or an HR designated kind of office or person, that means it's more likely that they're going to have some kind of process already in place for disability accommodations. Certainly thinking through. Kind of what the mission or values or stated kind of self-descriptions of the company or group, especially, to Olivia's point of looking for clues of is this a place that at least on paper or somewhere claims to value diversity and inclusion. Um, and then I love the idea, Olivia, I think, had called it being doing a little digging and doing some research. I might think of it as light stalking of the company itself, of trying to find out some more information, whether that's looking at Glassdoor, to Kelsey's point of how people talk about the company that they're working at. Hannah suggesting that you take some cues from, again, the mission, the purpose, the work, or the populations that company works with. Although, I would also caution not to make the assumptions about just because allies are great, but I've certainly worked in some situations that were specifically around disability and then found myself being one of those people that are being served rather than being integrated into a group that specifically was working around disability. And, I think other things to look out for are if companies have affinity groups. Oftentimes companies will have like a parents group or a pickleball group, but oftentimes companies will also have like a family and friends and disabled people group or some kind of affinity group. So again, doing a little bit of maybe what you might think of as outside of the box research on the company that you're applying to are really great ways to look for signals regarding inclusivity. I'm double checking. I see that can't believe this has gone by so quickly. We're getting close on time. So I'm double checking to see if there's other questions that have come in. But I know that there was one, and there's a new one that just, one question that had come in a little earlier was, I'm wondering if any of our panelists have accommodations at work that they didn't have while they were in school or vice versa. In thinking about that transition from what it's like to be in college and the accommodations that you might need to be successful there versus the type of accommodations that you need to be successful at work. So I don't know if anybody has the experience of it being a really different kind of accommodation setting or needs between work and school. Kelsey.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily if I feel like this is a parallel example, but not exactly answering your question. So it's more of something that affects me at work or affected me at my past job that did not affect me at school as much as far as my disability was working in an open environment. I know Hannah touched on this, that your accommodations weren't working because you were in an open office space. And I do notice with my ADHD, working in an open office space has identified itself in my career as like a clear no. But for some reason during school, I think you're not in that situation as often. You're doing more independent work or work as a group where you're having discussion and then sitting quietly and kind of writing it down. But during work, it's like the phones are ringing, somebody's having a conversation next to me, this and this and that. And I find myself to be very easily distracted in those situations. And so I guess something I just would want to say with that is that I know we've said it already, but things are ever changing as far as like what you need as somebody who might identify with a disability. And something that didn't bother me before can now bother me now, and that's fine. And I'm allowed to have ever changing flexibility with what I need.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great example. That's a great example. Yeah, Hannah.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
can.
great. Yeah, I wanted to, bring back up Kelsey's point of like just adjusting, being like trying to adjust to your environment, especially with like neurodivergence and like ADHD. I have a really hard time focusing at home. But again, when I'm in the office surrounded by a ton of people, I can't really get a lot done there either. Um, and I would say that everyone, like my whole cohort, works from home on Mondays and Fridays. And there are a few people that come in on Mondays and Fridays. But typically the office is very quiet then. And so I have informally traded my work from home days to be like Tuesday and Wednesday. And then I work in the office on Mondays and Fridays instead, because it allows me to focus. I like get out of my own space. I really don't like working at home a whole lot. Have a hard time focusing at home. Um, and at work when there's a ton of people there. So being at the office on Mondays and Fridays when there's no one or, just one or two people there, has been really helpful. And not something that I could do, at school. It's not like you can miss a day of class and reschedule it for another day. Especially when like professors might not want to record um their classes, and so you have to be there like at a certain time. Um and that was a struggle bus for me. But yeah, again, glad to have that like office flexibility of sorts.
Hmm. Absolutely. Thank you.
I can maybe wrap us up a little bit.
I love it. Thanks, Olivia.
But I've gone through the accommodation process since kindergarten. So I've been kind of an old hand at this kind of work. I've been in the process a couple of times, and I will say that one thing I've noticed is that depending on the work that you do, it's really more so focused on like what can we do, similar to kind of what everyone's talked about here is like what can we do to get you successful? What can we do to get you to get the job functions done? And so there's a lot more flexibility I find than with a rigorous academics where it's these are the things you have to get done. These are the learning objectives I need you to achieve, and you need to do it by this timeline. It's a lot stricter in an academic schedule, especially here at the University of Washington, where it's a quarterly basis and you're moving. So I think that coming into the workforce, I expected it to be a lot more demanding than it was. It was like, hey, no, you have more time. You have more flexibility. We can work with you as long as you let us know what's going on ahead of time and we can figure something out. So I think I've really found a blessing with that. But I also find that there's a lot less structure sometimes when it comes to the workplace accommodation. You don't have something set up like a typical academic accommodation. So, typically you'll go in for these meetings, you'll get assessed, they'll give you these set of accommodations that meet what they think you'll need. But that is a description that is already set, that's pre-made for you, right? You don't have that when you go into a workforce. You just kind of have to say, hey, these are the things I need. And sometimes it takes a lot of trial and error, like everyone's kind of discussed, to figure out what exactly that looks like. So I think for me, it's been a pro and con on either side, depending on kind of how you look at it. But those are the things that I've noticed the most.
Yes, absolutely. And looking at the time, we are wrapping up, but I just want to reiterate, I think the importance of what we heard is one of the big differences between school and work is school. We really think a lot of ourselves. Those are compressed, tight timelines. It's very rigorous. It's got to all happen now. Versus in the workplace, people are like, "Nah, we're going to be here. We're going to be here for years. You got time to get it done." But that also means that it's important to be able to articulate that you need something to help you be fully successful, and ideally to even have suggestions. It's good to start with, this might work, recognizing it's a negotiation, it's a process between you and the employer, and that it may take a while for you to figure out what really does work best. And as soon as you figure it out, to remember that things could also change and you might need a different kind of accommodation. And I'll just reiterate, Brianna had just posted in the chat that Brianna says, I think most employers really appreciate requests when you approach it from the angle of this is what would help me to be maximally successful, effective, efficient in this role, which is exactly the point of this panel and other programming that our career and internship center is putting together. So if you would like additional resources, please check out the Career Center's website and join us for other programs. And a number of our panelists have very generously offered to chat with folks or talk to people if you would like to follow up with them personally or ask them more questions. We will make sure and share that information out with folks along with the recording. And I just want to say one more time, thank you so much, Olivia, Kelsey, Hannah, for sharing your wisdom with us, for sharing your vulnerability with us and talking about these things. And I'll just say that, as Olivia said, I think we need more radicalism right now. Let's talk about it. So thank you very much. All right. Yes, this session is recorded and will be made available.